gives a little spinning. Okay, so we are live. So hello to everybody who is watching this now as we're live on Wednesday night. And for those who are watching later, I know we've got a few people that tune in and watch this later in the week. So hello to anyone and everyone, whoever's watching this whenever. If you guys want to comment in and let us know that you're here, we'd love to see who's watching tonight. The way that we broadcast this, we can't see who's watching. So you have to comment and tell us that you're watching. But David is not here. He's fine. He did not get raptured or anything silly like that. He's on vacation this week, and we got to give the man a real vacation and not half Zoom vacation. So we have our special guest for tonight. Everybody, this is Blair Thompson White, and hello. Blair has taken a new appointment. So I may get the job title wrong, but I believe you're Director for Leadership Development at Texas Methodist Foundation.
Yes, so the actual title is Director of Leadership Ministry, but that's enough. You're great. Yeah, so I'm with Texas Methodist Foundation. I'm really
You might explain it a little bit if you want.
Yeah, sure. So we really get to be a part of conversation of looking at where God is leading the church today. So conversation around innovation, what it means to be a thriving congregation, the leadership that clergy need to have in order to lead in this time, and how we can help provide space for them to really live into what that is, how God's calling them to lead in their context. So so I get to meet a lot of really dynamic people and learn a lot. It's our really philosophy is guided by Margaret Wheatley, who's a social scientist, and she says, and I think this is really relevant actually to our conversation today. She says that that conversation is the currency of change. Conversation is the currency of change, and so the idea that what we do is help facilitate those conversations that need to happen in order for individuals and for the church to change, to become more like God envisions. And so I've already, in the last 3 months of my time there, I've already been changed by the conversations I've been a part of. So, and I'm hopeful for us tonight that we can, through our conversation, you and me, and then those who can participate in the chat, I think the Spirit shows up when we have conversation about things that really matter. And so that's my anticipation for tonight. No pressure, but
fine. No, that's great. And so Blair was working appointments previously so Blair's an elder in that's church like David and I. And so she was working appointments in the local church, and she was senior pastor of a congregation in Dallas before she got appointed to TMF. So we've been kind of, through the process of Katrina and I getting commissioned, have had some really fun educational moments for our Creekwood fans of how itineracy works, and how as elders, we can deacons can find appointments anywhere, but as elders, we can kind of get moved even outside of the work of the local church, and how that all still works in the United Methodist connection.
Great. Yeah. And congratulations again to you and your commissioning. And I think the world of you and see God at work in you and through you and your ministry. So it's really fun to get to do this tonight and just to walk alongside you as you continue to lead in the ways God is calling you. So yeah, thanks for being here. I'm so glad to be with Creekwood.
Oh my gosh, it's so fun. We've had all kinds of different friends on, so it's fun to tell people how we know folks. But Blair and I met because I did not take a job that Blair had offered me. And Blair still wanted to be in my life. So that tells you about her. And she's just been with me the last year with interviews and life. And we were sitting on her back porch this morning, hanging out before we do Bible study tonight. So
great. I love it. I'm so excited. I'm learning from you. I love your resilient faith and the way that you articulate what our faith calls us to do. So I'm always inspired by time with you. So let's have more. I'm having tea right now. So we had tea this morning, and we're
sparkling water.
Yes. So I'm going to sip. I love it. This is what I do for Bible study. I got my Bible and my tea and my friends, and it's let's
so great.
Spirit's going to show up. Yeah.
We did have a couple of weeks where people were commenting what they were drinking while having Bible study. And we did have a few that chose to partake in adult beverages. So if you're having a patio adult beverage night, that's great. Let us know. Yes. But Blair works at TMF, and then her husband Adam is also clergy. And they have two dogs, is what I saw today.
They're here with me now. So they'll be experiencing Ruth, which I thought was really important for them to kind of have some listening in on this too. But yeah, so we're full out on the dog parenting thing for sure. So,
love it.
Yeah.
That's so good. And where does Adam work again? I forgot.
At Grace United Methodist Church, East Dallas. So it's kind of by Baylor Hospital down there. Great history, beautiful stained glass windows, and a congregation that's committed to the community and to serving the needs of the community. So he's been there for quite a while, I think almost a decade in and out. So yeah,
wow.
They really helped to inspire him and really live into his call as a deacon. So we're grateful for that community.
We do love a good elder deacon partnership in all the different ways we see it. So that's cool. Okay, well, we're going to move into Ruth 4 tonight, everyone. And our questions are a little bit different, I think, than the last couple of weeks. A lot of them are just, I think, really reflective, which I'm excited, kind of Blair's vision casting a little bit for this next time together. So for those of you who are watching, if you feel free to hop in on the comments and to tell us kind of parts of your story. I know Kathy and Bill Bradford and Laura Howard and a couple of others carried on. We have so loved getting to engage and get to know you better through some of this. And so a lot of these questions were written with you guys in mind, kind of with this last chapter. So I'm really, really excited about that. So before we get into Ruth 4, I'll kind of give us a little bit of a review of Ruth, just because it's not one that you can just pick up and start reading chapter 4 and be fine. Like you kind of have to know what's happening. So in the first chapter, really the main character that it centers around is Naomi, and it tells us about what happens to her. And nothing goes well for Naomi. She leaves Israelite territory to go to Moab because there's a famine in Israel. In Moab, in the Old Testament, if you're an ancient Israelite hearer of the word, when you hear Moab, you should think danger, danger, danger. Because like nothing good happens in Moab. It's like how New Yorkers talk about New Jersey. Like it is just not ideal.
That's a very good analogy there. Okay, that's good.
Yeah, Mike Bachman doesn't watch this.
This is so helpful.
Well, I've been doing it for 4 weeks, so I've gotten good. You're getting the best part of it. But nothing goes well, and all of the men in the family pass away. And so it's Naomi's husband and her 2 sons. And so Naomi's left with her 2 daughters-in-law. One of them, Orpah, leaves, as was totally fine customs and law at the time. But Ruth kind of breaks the rules and asks to stay with Naomi. And so there's this really cool moment of kind of female friendship and bonding that is really beautiful to see. So they go back to Bethlehem because they've heard that the famine is over. And Naomi's friends, who show up again in chapter 4, tell her she doesn't look so great. And Naomi is really mad at God. She's not having a good time. She's experiencing grief. So Ruth in chapter 2 goes and starts working because these 2 women, we talked a lot about survival. When your basic status, and we're going to see this in chapter 4, is property, you need to work. And so Ruth went and worked in the fields, and she meets this guy named Boaz. And from what we could tell in the text, we think Boaz is a pretty stand-up guy, except we had then this like back and forth discussion about when Boaz feeds Ruth, and he's like, oh, it's because you have a good reputation. That was such in stark contrast. Like the law says you should do that, Boaz. Like it's not because she's a good girl. Like you're just supposed to do that. Nice. So that was chapter 2. We had a really great discussion with Colin Eccles Richter. And then last week with Ruth 3, there's this whole incident on the threshing floor, which we talked about, and some of it I left up for everyone to go home and Google themselves.
Yeah.
But if you think it sounds like a sexual overtone in chapter 3, it is. And if you think it's not, it probably is. It's just full of poetic innuendo in the Hebrew that the English really lets us down. Because if you take it literally, it's like, she did what?
Right.
And so
my seminary professor, I don't know who you had, Old Testament, but he would always kind of clap as a way to help us to understand that maybe what was happening was a little, different than what was stated, maybe. So yeah, it was very helpful. We would just clap and we would go, okay, we got it. Yeah.
Mine would look at us like, he would like duck his head down, look at us through, like, not through his glasses when it was something else. It was very something like
on here. Yeah, that's good.
The day that we did Song of Songs was just all this. So that was chapter 3. So Boaz and Ruth have this incident on the threshing floor, and who knows, right? Okay, not ideal. And usually when stuff's happening on the threshing floor, like bad reputations are happening there. And so people that are hearing this in the original are like, oh gosh, like it was kind of this like suspenseful, uncomfortable thing. But Boaz agrees to redeem Ruth and says that there's this next of kin in levirate marriage. When your husband died, you had to marry his brother. And if his brother died, then you married his brother. And it kept going till you ran out of men, I guess. And so Boaz tells Ruth that there is a next of kin that's closer to her than he is, or closer to her father-in-law than he is. It's a whole thing. So we're gonna pick up where that leaves off in chapter 4.
I'm toasting you in that summary, because I love that. Yeah.
It is so, we did Philippians and we did Micah and we did Mark, and so none of them required massive summaries, but this is the first, and we've called this a narrative parable, is kind of the literary genre here.
Yeah.
And so much in chapter 4 comes from chapter 1. So we're gonna try to make sure, even if you haven't seen chapter 1 and 2 and 3, you're caught up tonight. So did I miss anything that you want to add about chapters 1 through 3?
I cannot imagine adding anything to that. That was great. And I'm sure things will come up, maybe as we dig into this a little bit, but yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Well, then we are to go and do chapter 4 now. We can get to what we're doing. So we're going to start with verses 1 through 4, and I'm going to pull up my notes to recall what I sent today. Okay, so this is, and I'm reading from the NISV again. If you're at home and you're reading from a different version and something is phrased in a way that you think is interesting or is just different and you have a question about, feel free to throw that in the comments too. I know a few of you have like CEV or NIV at home. It's always interesting to see how, even in the English, how things are translated for us, particularly with some of the intricacies here. So we will do, this is verses 1 through 4. So it says, no sooner had Boaz gone to the gate and sat down that the next of kin, whom Boaz had spoken, came passing by. So Boaz said, come over, friend, sit down here. And he went over and sat down. Then Boaz took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, sit down here. So they sat down. He said to the next of kin, Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, is selling the parcel of land that belonged to our kinsman Elimelech. So I thought I would tell you of it and say, buy it in the presence of those sitting here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not, tell me so that I may know, for there is no one prior to you to redeem it, and I come after you. So he said, I will redeem it. So just a couple of kind of words of explanation here. What I read in my commentary today, the next of kin, like the Hebrew for it, like what they're calling this person can, like, it would be best translated as like if we called him Mr. So-and-so. Like, we don't even give this guy a name. Mm-hmm. Like, the author is not even messing around. An author who names women in a text is not even going to name this guy. Yeah. And so Mr. So-and-so, like, Boaz immediately goes out and he just happens to be walking by, which I just love. Like, he's already there. We're about to solve this problem. No suspense needed. And so he gathers the elders of the city and he goes into the city. He says, but sits by the city gate, which we don't really have a concept of in our modern, right? Like, you drive from Dallas into Collin County and you don't even know it. So the city gate kind of existed as this place where the legal matters happened. This was the spot where stuff got done, as far as things like land and, kind of this transaction was very normal. And So it's interesting. This is kind of the first we're hearing of a spot of land that Naomi owns that really wasn't present in the text before. So there's kind of the back and forth of, was it there? Did Naomi have it? Had Naomi already sold it? Like what? And we don't really know. Yeah, but it's the way in which Boaz is going about the conversation pertaining to Ruth, because all of his stuff we've seen behind the scenes has been about Ruth. It's been relational, but this is more economic, right? More transactional, and yeah, and I think there's this interesting like calling so and so like to come over, and the actions are happening in this public forum. So the first question I kind of wanted to talk through is, I think in modern times, and there's positive and negative to both, but we tend to like view and talk about faith as an individual journey, right? We talk about our personal relationships with God or our personal journeys. But the ancient Israelite culture was so rooted in community. Everything happened in community, right? Like handing over a piece of land, the discussion about it happened in community. And so let's say a couple of words just about that in general. And then maybe the question is, where have you seen God's redemptive work in community for you?
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, and it's so interesting that Boaz chooses this location, because it's like, okay, everybody is now going to hear what's going. It's almost like the townspeople become the jury. I mean, they're all going to hold you accountable now to whatever your answer is. And it's interesting because you do kind of wonder if this person would have been given a name if he, and I think it's fair to say if he would have redeemed this. Like if he would have gone along, he may have got a name in the actual text, which is interesting, but instead it's the so-and-so, but we'll come to that. So I think there is that piece of accountability in community. And I think the redeeming part can happen when we are held accountable to our actions. And so this, of course, reminds me of John Wesley, right? Our Methodist history of these covenant groups, and the accountability of that, and it was unlike anything I've seen really in our current modern small groups. I mean, we have some sense of it in some places, but not to the degree that Wesley would really hold people accountable. And he believed that kind of group, that kind of discipline, that disciplined life, and having someone ask you about your prayer life and ask you where you're spending your money and ask you if you're doing justice and tending to the means of grace. So he just really believed that really helped people move towards salvation, towards that greater flourishing in the spirit. And that's certainly been my experience. When I've been in small groups that have held me accountable. I have a clergy small group that has been with me for a while, and dear sister friends that create a space for me to be my full self, to be fully seen, and then mirror back to me myself, so that I can see the parts of me that need redeeming, that I can grow in grace. And it is that kind of mutual sharing. And the last thing I say, and I want to hear what you have to say, obviously, about this, but is it really like these kinds of authentic friendships, and of course, this is not a necessarily a friendship that's happening in the story, but for our conversation purposes, like if we're going to grow together and if we're going to have a space to be vulnerable and to be fully seen, that could perhaps lead us into, redemption in a deeper way, then we have to have what I think Carl Rogers said is unconditional positive regard. And I really love that. Because that's saying like, I'm going to see you and have this unconditional, and I really think that's probably how God looks at us, with unconditional positive regard. And can we look at one another that way? And if we can, and we can know that we're seen in that way, that then creates space for transformation, for personal growth. So that's a lot, but
it's okay.
All around, I went from accountability into this unconditional positive regard, but I think it is connected here. What about you? What are some of your thoughts?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot. One of the things I have tried to like gain an appreciation for in my faith journey is the parts of other religions that I just am like convinced some other religions do better than us. Like Muslims actually stop and pray 5 times a day, no matter what they're doing, and they all do it together, right? Like there's just something beautiful in that. Because if we told Christians that y'all had to pray 5 times a day, like I don't know how many of y'all would still want to do this.
Yeah.
And so one of the things I love about the Jewish faith and the Jewish culture is this total focus on community, and it starts with the family. It's very nuclear, right? Like even just the celebration of Hanukkah is rooted in being with the family, or the Seder meal, you know, and the youngest person at the table gets to ask the questions.
Yeah.
So that's one thing that I can appreciate, I think, about other religions. But I think that like in COVID time, people have experienced, and maybe not COVID time, maybe I want to go broader. So in times of like really significant trauma, I think we realize who shows up, and that's a big deal. And that's the community, right? And we talked about this a couple times on Bible study before, but sometimes being a friend means saying nothing, right? I think sometimes we're afraid of community because we think we're not smart enough or haven't lived enough life to be friends with so-and-so or whatever. But there's just never underestimate the power of showing up. And I think that's what, like, even in here, these 10 elders that Boaz goes and gets, like, these people show up for him. Like, what are you doing? Okay, let's go sit by the gate. And that's where I've seen God's redemptive work, right? It's in the constant showing up. It's in the constant, and I think the accountability piece you bring up is interesting. I've always wanted to have a group that would do the Wesley questions, but then sometimes I look at them and I'm like, I don't want to answer that to myself.
Hey, they're so intense, right? And
they are. Yeah, but wow, right? Like what we know it did for those communities, and we know it did for people's faith journeys, like, and that happened, and the individual transformation happened in community. And maybe that's what I'm thinking too with my question. The individual, like, and David Lessner says this, so I am not original, but we push small groups really hard at Creekwood because we believe that small groups is where church happens.
Yeah.
That's the piece of, I mean, I've just been able to watch so many folks respond so well to one another. You know, some of the recently widowed members of our congregation who, when I call one and I'm asking about the other, they're like, oh, I talked to her yesterday. We talk every day on the phone. Like, it's so precious. So I do think that, yeah, we need each other. And I hope that COVID strengthened that, or at least taught us how we can do that better. I don't know. It just, because God totally in my life and walk has worked so much redemption through other people, right? It takes those strong friendships of the people who really fully know you and still want to still love you, right? When you feel you're most unlovable, the people who know you the best still love you.
Yeah.
That was long-winded too, but
no, I love that. And I think what we're getting at too is that there is within a community the potential for personal transformation, or the communal transformation that then leads to even broader, even like systemic transformation. You know, that it does kind of grow into thy kingdom come work beyond that immediate, you know, small group or community even. And, you know, like I think about, and I think it's somewhere, and I'm my notes are a little bit scrambled. So, but there's a word here in Hebrew, it's like, it's covering, but then it's also, because I think it's the part where he's his ears. I don't know if we're there yet. But he, you know, he's basically referring to, like, I'm gonna uncover your ears because I'm gonna tell you something here. Like, and the other idea is like covering in Hebrew relates to like recovery too. Like there's a recovering, like uncovering is like a recovering. Like you're, if that makes sense at all, like you begin to kind of, and the other, for me, this, I've said this before, but it is an apocalyptic time right now, in the sense of not like which is sometimes a word that leads people. It's like they're already leaving us on our Bible study here just by me saying that. But no, what I mean is, like, apocalyptic is the actual word is uncovering. It's like it's revealing something that needs to be seen and hasn't been. It's been covered up, and so I think that's also what can happen is the uncovering leads us to this recovering of our world, this movement towards thy kingdom come, like I said earlier. So I guess that's my one check on community, is that if you're just sitting there and like navel gazing, and you're like, that's not the ultimate purpose. Like, it should recover the world to what God imagines, and so that's why I think like movements like what certainly we've seen with the civil rights movement, I mean, I just finished a great book, and you're going to ask me the title of it, and I'm terrible with titles, but it's John Lewis. It's the most recent biography about him by Meacham. It's so great. I hope everybody will read it. But it's that collective movement, like it starts with this uncovering of what's really going on, and it starts with this movement that then blossoms into the world for the better. And so I guess that's, for me, that's always my check, is what we're doing not just making us better, but moving us out into the world.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, as you were describing it, I was thinking of the suffragette movement was born out of a small group of women that met together and decided to have a speech on a courthouse steps. I mean, and and we're still figuring out how to do that well and better, right? But that small group met and birthed something that outlived them. And so I think that's a really great testament, both of those examples, to how friendship and how I think when we talk about relationships, especially at church, we were talking about this morning. I think sometimes we think, oh yeah, like marriages, which yes, your marriage should totally like use kingdom building words and point towards God and be a good thing. But it's all the ways in which we relate to people, that we want to be honoring people, and loving people. And that includes our small group of friends and the small group of enemies we have too. And yeah, that's really good. I'm glad you mentioned that biography too. That'll be great.
Although I failed to give you the title of it, but I think it's His Truth is Marching On. I think that's it. Something like that. John Meacham's most recent biography. So that is a must read for everybody. It is inspiring. It's helping to see history in a new way. So many of the people that were a part of it, I can't recommend it highly enough, because it really does illustrate this point of the power of a movement to change the world, a movement rooted in deep faith and deep commitment to working together to change the world, and they did. They really did. I mean, we still have a lot of change to go, but wow, I mean, the power of the Spirit working through them is really, really inspiring.
That's so great. Okay, I am going to move us on to verses 5 and 6, because it always feels really slow, and then the time always works out just fine.
Right.
But sometimes I get messages and like halfway through, and they're like, "You're not going to make it." Like,
yeah, that's good.
I managed to get through like 75 verses with David and Edgar Bazan, and at one point I had to be like, "We're moving on."
Right on. Well, just please guide me. Yeah.
Yeah, you're good. No worries. Okay, so this is verses 5 and 6. So it says, "Then Boaz said, 'The day that you acquire the field from the hand of Naomi, you are also acquiring Ruth the Moabite, the widow of the dead man, to maintain the dead man's name on his inheritance.' At this, the next of kin said, 'I cannot redeem it for myself without damaging my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption yourself, for I cannot redeem it.'" So this is a whole discussion that all the commentaries have, like all kinds of different ways in which they view the exchange that happens here. So I think what's happening at face value, what's happening here is so-and-so realizes that the land that he has the right to comes with someone he will marry, based on this levirate law and how that worked, and potentially have offspring with, right? Oh, look, Steve just brought your title in.
Ooh, thank you, Steve. High five.
Oh my goodness.
Right on.
Bless. You're the, oh my gosh. Steve, I didn't know if you're watching on your patio tonight or not. Steve's usually my patio guy for Bible study. So anyway, so only wants the profitable parts of what he's supposed to do, right? The land would bring him crops that he could sell or he could eat. But when it came to kind of this duty of a person and offspring, that's where he said, well, I can't take that without damaging my own inheritance. So I'm not going to do that. There's also another question of, there was a commentator that had this discussion that maybe like Boaz was still going to marry Ruth and they were going to have offspring, and that offspring was going to get the land instead of so-and-so later. You know, both to me seemed like legitimate ways to interpret. Either way, so-and-so is out.
Right.
I actually wrote my question for 5 and 6 is about verse 7. So we'll just get there in a second. But is there anything about this kind of backing out of so-and-so that we want to comment on or say anything about?
I think there's way more interesting things to talk about. So I'm good to move on.
Cool. That's great. Let me read.
Great. There are a lot of different thoughts and opinions on this piece. So
yeah. I think 7 through 11 will get us plenty of questions. Let me go ahead and read that. Steve, I'm sorry that you're not on your patio. I guess it is too dark now for patio during Bible study hours. It was more fun in the summer, I guess. Okay, so this is verses 7 through 11. Now this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging. To confirm a transaction, the one took off a sandal and gave it to the other. This was the manner of attesting in Israel. So when the next of kin said to Boaz, acquire it for yourself, he took off his sandal. Then Boaz said to the elders of all the people, today you are witnesses that I have acquired from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech, and all that belonged to Chilion and Mahol, which I still don't know how to say those properly, but oh well. I have acquired Ruth the Moabite, the Elon, to be my wife, to maintain the dead man's name on his inheritance, in order that the name of the dead may not be cut off from his kindred and from the gate of his native place. Today you are witnesses. Then all the people who were at the gate, along with the elders, said, we are witnesses. May the Lord take the woman coming to your house, like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you produce children in Ephraim and bestow a name in Bethlehem. Okay, so that was through 11. So a couple of things that are happening here, just for some notes. So the passage, the narrator or whoever the writer is of this stops and takes a second to tell us like what the custom is before describing the action, which I think is really interesting, that even this had to be described to whatever the original hearer was, because it wasn't like what was happening anymore. Because that's like what we do here when we take a break and we're like, well, this is what this actually means, and before telling you what happens. But the transaction's official. Boaz declares it to everyone, and then they kind of give this really interesting blessing that we're going to talk about. So the first question that I have for us, well, let me make sure. Sorry, few things. So the word acquire, and this is icky, and women were totally property in the Old Testament. So just like it already is what it is, everybody. But the word acquire actually does have multiple translations. Obviously there's like purchase or possess, but the word acquire, the Hebrew that's translated here, can also mean like create, or that word redemption that we've been talking about, to make one's own by redeeming. So that's kind of a cool like little mini textual moment here. Like, so the first thing I want to talk about is this moment of blessing that the elders say back to Boaz, after he makes this declaration. And my thought that I have is, I don't know how well we do that anymore. like celebrating with people when little or even big good things happen in their life. So I just kind of had this thought, like, what are modern day ways that we can live out this kind of like communal celebration or blessing moment? And how do we, or how have you even seen like celebrations of different life stages now that, you know, we live longer than ancient Israelites? How have we seen that done well, or how would we want that to be done well?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. I lean on Barbara Brown Taylor for her one chapter in her book. Here I am, like sharing another book title here. I don't know.
It's okay.
So, Altar in the World, Barbara Brown Taylor, must read. It is probably in my top 10 all-time favorite spiritual growth books. I probably read it. I read parts of it at least once a year. I mean, it's just a go-to. But she has a chapter in there about pronouncing blessings. It totally changed my whole view of what that means. And she even goes so far, and she's an Episcopalian priest, to I think she has an actual blessing for the bathroom, like blessing what happens in the bathroom, that we bless the human body and the capacity that we have to, you know, move through the cycles of life and things. It's a beautiful frame for living, to begin to see the blessings around, to see the everyday ordinary things as blessings, and then not just see them, but also pronounce them as such for one another. And in the way that we do that, of course, then we name it as holy in a way. We acknowledge the holiness in matter, that matter matters. That's her phrasing. So I think you're exactly right. So I guess I would push and say that it's one thing to celebrate something, but it's a whole nother thing to name a blessing and to acknowledge God's presence in this place, in this gift, and just to take the time to give thanks in a communal way, even, and say, this is a blessing, and I'm acknowledging our Creator. I'm acknowledging the gift of this community, and I'm blessing it for what God has made it to be. You know, so that's my one little frame on it.
No, it's good. When I was 16, my pastor actually, for all of us, would bless our vehicles when we turned 16. Would come to our house and pray a blessing over our car, that we would make good choices with it, I think, for one, but for safety too, right? And that was just a really cool thing and that's not in the book of discipline anywhere. Like, that was just an extra thing he did, right?
I think that we may need to write in that may need to be into like some version of the book of worship or something. Blessings, kinds of things.
Yeah. And I've thought about that a lot since that happened. One of the things that I have done, so my very best friend in the whole wide world lives in Fredericksburg, Texas, and she's an elementary school teacher. And over the last couple of life stage things for her, it just has dawned on me. I've always stayed at her house kind of when things have happened, whether she got engaged or when she bought the new house or when she got married, and now she's pregnant, which is exciting. But every time I leave, I just leave a note on the bed that I just literally Google. I don't come up with it. I Google like a blessing for a new home, a blessing for a marriage, a blessing for an engagement season. And just stuff like that, like being intentional. And she's kept all of them. She's framed them actually. Like, oh, it kills me.
So that's so meaningful. That's really wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah. And so one of the other ways I've seen it done well on a technological front, my friend Holly runs a parachurch organization that works to uplift women specifically who are leading in church and nonprofit organizations. And so she uses her Twitter platform to uplift and celebrate and kind of call holy some of the work that women are doing in all ecumenical spaces. And so there was one, like, she tweeted about her first day of seminary. And so Holly retweeted it and said, like, let's pray a blessing for Catherine today. And I don't even know this person, but I follow Holly, who's a friend of mine. So it's so cool to get to engage with people, with women I don't even know. But when I graduated from seminary, you know, Holly retweeted mine, and a bunch of people I didn't know were commenting. So it's just a really cool way to use the platform to create community and to acknowledge. And I think you're right. There's this celebrating, and then there's just calling it holy of what God's doing through getting a car or getting married or having a child go to college, and being an empty nester now. There's I think the Book of Common Prayer has a prayer for like a workspace where you walk in, and then there's like one that is like moving through the house.
Nice.
I don't know if it has bathroom like Barbara Brown Taylor. So you guys can just combine it.
Yeah. So what? And yeah, that reminds me of just this thought of looks like you're being asked here to share it. The Twitter handle for the women's clergy support. That's great, and I'd love that too. So
yeah, I'll put it in the comments.
But I was just thinking about how recently we sold a car, my car, and we had several people come and look at it. So ultimately, it was purchased by a family for their son's first car. And as we finished the transaction, and everything, and he's there, and he was, kind of shy, I think, and yet the family said, "Oh, he's so excited." And so anyway, but as we were just finishing up, I just felt moved, and I just said, I just want you to know that I bless you in this car, and I bless your travels. I pray that they're safe, that you are safe, that this car gives you much joy for the years ahead. I just did, a little blessing, and I just I just felt moved to say that, and the mom just started tearing up, and I thought it really was a lesson to me, because I felt like, okay, well, I'm really glad that I was open for that. Like that in that moment, I was willing to offer that. As awkward as it felt initially, it really resonated, and I just thought, I left there going, what would it be like if we all walked around blessing each other, Like, and so it would be a lot better, right? I mean, it just to be filled with more blessings. We could use a lot more of that, I think.
So I think this is a good moment to tell everybody. So you don't have to be clergy to bless people or bless things. This is not this is not a sacrament. Like, you're good to go. We're not going to get defrocked if you bless things. And I think that we had Leanne Hadley on a couple of weeks ago, Blair, and her she has sacred circle time with children, and she closes it by blessing all of the children with chapstick, either on their head or on their hand. But a couple years ago at annual conference, her children the children of the children's directors who work with her, they did a blessing on everyone at annual conference. And so our children were leading us with blessing bombs. And there's something too, like, and that's how I've started to like close out my letters, is because of Leanne Hadley. I say, you are a blessing. There's something to hearing that. Yeah. And so how cool would it be if we were using that word to come another. So when they're on, she said, okay, I'll lean your forehead really close to the camera and I'll give you a blessing. Right. It was amazing.
Yeah.
So I posted the Twitter handle in the comments here. Now She Rises is the nonprofit that Holly runs, but then her personal Twitter is at Holly Stalkup, if anybody wants to follow both. But that's in the comments here. So I actually do want to talk about women to have a seamless transition here.
I love that. Yes. Excellent.
So in the blessing that's mentioned here, Rachel and Leah are name dropped here. And in a second, we're going to, Tamar gets name dropped in verse 12. And these are, again, if you're an original hearer hearer of these words, of this story, when you hear Rachel and Leah, that's a ping, right? And you're like, oh, very important women. Mm-hmm. But these are women who, the story of Rachel and Leah, we've had a segue the last couple of weeks in Bible study of these are terrible Bibles, like terrible bedtime stories for the kids. Story of Rachel and Leah, not a great bedtime story for everyone, but an interesting one.
Yeah.
But they had children, what I would say is in a non-traditional way, like even for Israelite culture. There's a lot that goes on in that story. And yet these two women are the mothers of a nation.
Yeah.
And so I would say that they're very, and even Tamar has an unconventional story. Oh, yeah. And so all of these are non-traditional, and yet these three women are name dropped in this chapter. And And so one of the things I wanted us to take some time to talk about is who is someone in your faith journey that either was unexpected or worked in unexpected ways? And we'll leave that to the comments too, and give people some
I want to hear people for sure. Yeah, so I'll share a story, and then I think it will kind of lead me here into the scripture in a new way, maybe too. We'll see how it goes. So the person that I thought of when I was in seminary, I served a congregation that had a relationship with an organization in Guatemala called ODEEM, and regularly every year went on mission trips to visit and to do medical missions, and also helping build homes and all those things. But I went last second on a medical mission team, which is ridiculous because I don't know anything related to medical, but they taught me how to do blood pressure. And all that being said, it was a time in my life in which I was very busy. I was doing full-time seminary. I was working at this church, and then this last second thing came up, and I was like, I just feel like I need to go. I need to go do this trip to Guatemala, and yeah, they need extra pair of hands. I can do that. And so I was there, but I was also in a very hurried state in my life. Mm-hmm. And for those who are into the Enneagram, do y'all do that at Creekwood? Do you have?
Most of our Sunday school classes have done it, and we've used the language on Bible study, so it's totally safe to say it.
So I'm a 3 on the Enneagram, and that means that I typically move at a very fast pace, very task-oriented, success-driven, achievement, all those things. And so I was certainly in that place in seminary, in this working and doing all the things. And so I went into that mission experience with that kind of mindset. And we'd get up early in the morning and walk to the clinic, 7 a.m., something like that. And in Guatemala, when you walk in the streets, it's just tradition that you greet everybody and you say buenos dias, or whatever the time of day is. And so we would do that, and I was doing that, but I was also walking very fast to get to the clinic, because that was my lifestyle, is very fast walking. And as I was walking, I passed a woman, and she was very old and wearing the traditional Guatemalan dress, which is beautiful. It's Mayan, from the Mayan tradition, and lots of colors. And she was kind of hunched over and just shuffling very slowly on the side of the road. And I started to go past her, and I said, buenos dias. And I was zooming past her, and she reached out and grabbed my arm. And that was, very surprising, unexpected, that she would reach out and grab me like that. And she pulled me into her and made me walk with her. I should say invited me to walk with her, but it really felt like more of she made me walk with her. So she made me slow down and walk with her. And I will tell you that was, for me, the way I interpreted that whole thing later as I looked back on. I mean, I walked the rest of the way with her very slowly. My Spanish gets a little better when I'm in Guatemala, and she said, something about her husband used to walk with her. And so, but for me, she embodied Jesus the Christ for me in that moment, reaching out, grabbing me, inviting me to slow down and pay attention. And so that for me relates to this story of our scripture of the people that we would typically deem as other, those that are not the ones, the ones that society looks at as positively, as influential. They are, in fact, the game changers. They are the ones that can point us in the direction of the holy, that God chooses the other to help carry out God's purposes in the world. And so that's really what's going on here. I mean, if you were to summarize the whole story of Ruth, I think that might be close to it, that God chooses the other to carry out God's purposes. And yeah, so I'll never forget that. And that has changed how I view everybody. I mean, that was such a moment of saying, I have got to be conscious of, number one, slowing down, number two, paying attention, especially to the others around me, and recognizing that they, in fact, hold the holy. And if I get closer to them, I will get closer to the Christ.
That's so wonderful. Kathy, I appreciate your 2. Everybody needs a good 2 to take care of them has been my motto lately. My friend Mackenzie's a 2, and she's been taking care of me in 2020. And so, yes, Kathy, we always need help. Thank you for living your 2-ness so well. my answer to this question, an unexpected person, when I had the chance to go to Israel, it was with seminary classmates. And so a lot of our time was spent, I think when you go to seminary, you just gain a certain angst for things. And your sense of humor really gets really good. Mine got very good in seminary. I think I gained my sense of humor in seminary. But there was a lot of the parts of the trip in Israel that were just kind of frustrating, right? Like holy spaces that are supposed to be, that didn't feel like it. Because there were too many people and there was cameras and selfie sticks, and you're like, this is supposed to commemorate where Jesus died. Like, what are we doing? Yeah. And so a lot of that trip was spent like kind of angsty and kind of goofy about it. And the last night or the next to last night, we had a night where we went to this woman that we had worked with on the trip. We went to her house, and this man was leading worship. He had a guitar and candles were lit, and it was really simple. And he led us in these great kind of back and forth hymn type moments. And we found out, and I was able to just let go, and I was able to enjoy worship for the first time in a long time. And we found out at the end of it, he's Jewish. He didn't even believe in Jesus. And I was like, that was one of the best nights of worship of my whole life. And you're Jewish. Like, we don't even totally believe the same thing. We believe about half the same things. Like, oh my word. And I didn't have to know it before to enjoy it, like it was unexpected. Okay, I have a dog who I need to attend to for 1 second. So I'm going to let you respond to that while I take care of this. So sorry.
That's good. I know Keri Lynn has a new dog, fairly new here. So, which is also dogs. I'll just segue with that because we all love dogs, right? Can I get a little amen in the chat there? But here's the thing about dogs, right? Is that they are such a blessing. And I think about how we were talking about blessings earlier, the value, the importance, the gift of doing the blessing of the animals, and recognizing that St. Francis really saw that naming the animals as a blessing, that conferring a blessing on them for their well-being, that really puts us in our proper place as people who've been tasked with caring for creation. That part of caring for creation is blessing creation, blessing our dogs, blessing our animals. So it's good that Keri Lynn is attending to her dog now. So yeah, thanks, Bill. I appreciate it. I did a little like filler. You know how they do that on the news?
So great. Oh yeah, you were awesome. And actually, you're so brilliant because my dog was at the pumpkin patch yesterday. We are doing a blessing of the animals next Sunday night. So this is a great segue to advertising for an event.
Excellent.
So yeah, we're doing our second installment of outdoor worship next Sunday night, and we're going to do a blessing of the animals. So my sweet Rosie, even with all her terrible behavior she had in the last 5 minutes, will be there. She may need more than one blessing because she's a clergy kid dog. But yes, thank you for that wonderful segue. So that's great. And even our pets can be unexpected people in our faith journey, right? I know so many people who are fostering and adopting animals right now in quarantine that have really helped with some of the loneliness of the physical distancing. I know, like, I cuddle with Rosie a lot because I miss hugging people. Like at Creekwood, I'd get like 400 hugs every week. It just is a Sunday morning, right? So that's a great segue back from unexpected people in our faith journey. So I think we can move on to 12 through 17 here. I believe that, yeah, we can do that. Okay, so this is verses 12 through 17. So this is the end of the blessing from the community. It says, "And through the children that the Lord will give you by this young woman, may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah." So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. When they came together, the Lord made her conceive, and she bore a son. Then the woman said to Naomi, "Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without next of kin. May his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has borne him." Then Naomi took the child and laid him in her bosom and became his nurse. The women of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, "A son has been born to Naomi." They named him Obed because he became the father of Jesse, the father of David. Okay, so lots of name dropping here. So we'll explain some, and then some I'll just let everybody go research on their own if they want. So this name drop of Perez and Tamar is a reminder that Boaz comes from, in the genealogy, both the houses of Jacob and Leah and Jacob and Rachel. It was kind of a way that we figure out this genealogy. And so Boaz is this coming together of this family that was so complicated and had its moments and its issues. And so Ruth and Boaz conceive, and they have Obed, which is redemption for, it's written in here as redemption for Naomi. Remember in chapter 1, Naomi is the one who's walking around, who's mad at God and who's wondering, who says she went to Moab and came back with nothing but emptiness. And in this day and age, children is what made you full, right? Because your name and the legacy of your family was going to continue on. But I love that we get this very physical description of her taking the child and holding him and becoming his nurse. Naomi takes such an active role in this blessing of her grandson. And if you've ever had a wonderful grandparent like that, like, the love of a grandparent is a whole other thing, right? But the name Obed means servant or workman, like a person who works in the fields. And I thought that was so interesting because that's how Ruth and Boaz met, and that's the name that they give him. But I like that we see that redemption for Naomi comes through a person and not just the property and not just the marriage, but in her grandson. That she takes this active role in loving. She doesn't just love him from afar. So let's talk about verse 13. So it says, "They came together, and the Lord made her conceive, and she bore a son." So this is the first time that the narrator states God's actions since chapter 1, when it said that God sent a famine, which theologically we can have another discussion for another time. So what I wanted to talk about is, certainly we know that God is working and God is redeeming, not just in chapter 1 and chapter 4, but through the whole story of what's going on, right? Through all the experience of grief and of work and of family that's happening in this. And so I wanted for us to have the discussion, like, where are some times in our lives or places maybe where we forget to acknowledge God, or we choose not to acknowledge God, even though it's obvious that God is working?
It's a great question. I love and you've really hit on it here, but it's one of the huge overarching themes, this idea that human beings personify God's love, like the loving kindness of God to each other. And I'm sure that's not me. That's like someone else that said that, but I'm like, but that's what's happening here in this story over and over again. It's that, God is at work throughout the whole thing. Now, God's only mentioned twice by name, but the idea is that the human beings are personifying God for one another, and that's what the Lord is doing. Like it's through the human interaction that God's love is made known. So that's it. I've been really in my own personal journey this year, focusing on, like, how do I embody the love of God? Like, what does that look like in my body, in my being, so that I really, in everything I do, I reflect that, I am that, so that when people have encounters with me, like, that they leave feeling like they've experienced the kind of love that is divine love, and I think that's the goal of the Christian life. But yes, I guess back to this question though is, I'm sure that sometimes we're moving too fast. Maybe it's just me again. Here I am in my sweetness, but maybe we just don't pause enough to, like, take a deep breath and reflect on, all that has happened up until now and go, wow, okay, I see God at work through this person who blessed me in this way, or through this moment. Do we really pause? Do we reflect? And do we see God at work in the people that are in our lives? And I think about that, especially, we're all kind of, I don't know what it's like at y'all's houses, but sometimes we are a little tired of being around each other here, right? I mean, this is happening, but it's like, can we pause and notice how our partner, how our kids, how our puppies, or whatever are in whatever ways personifying God's love to us? Can we see that in one another? Are we willing to pause and look? And I think that's a real invitation for this particular time is this is a great pause, as it's been called, and maybe one of the gifts of the pause is this space to be available to see in a new way all that God is doing even up until now. So yeah, what are some of your thoughts about it, Keri Lynn?
Yeah, I think one of the things I've heard, and it's jokes, right? But one of the things that I've heard people say about church is like, okay, I need to go to church to get my Jesus fix.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that worship is something that we enjoy, right? Like that we enjoy the experience of worshiping corporately. But I've thought all about this a lot. Like, you can get your Jesus fix anywhere, right? And like, I love our sanctuary, and it is a holy space, but so is my porch. And so is when I take Rosie for a walk and it's behind my apartment. And I think that's where, clergy, we kind of have it easy and difficult at the same time, because God is in our work, but sometimes I think we forget to acknowledge the actual like spiritual side of God being in our work. And I would say the same is a lot of what I hear people asking me about a lot. Well, how can I serve God if I'm a CPA? Or how can I serve God if I'm a stay-at-home mom? How can I serve God if I'm a teacher? And so that's where I wish that we could see more the fluidity of God's Spirit and how God's Spirit is moving in the ministry that you're doing, where if you're a teacher, maybe can't mention God, right? Or if you're a CPA, God is working through you in the ways in which, kind of like you talked about, you embody God's love in all that you're doing to all people. For my stay-at-home moms, like, and that is a job. The way that God is working through the groups that you're part of, and the ways in which you are dedicating to your children. And for my working moms, it's the same, right? So that's the space where I think we find it difficult when church, and again, the great pause has become interesting because your living room has become church now. And so you can't go to church and get your Jesus fix and come home and forget about it, right? It's happening in your living room. And I'm hoping that it's going to help us remember that, for one, especially with our children, the most discipleship happens in the house with our parents, right? My life was shaped by my parents and the ways that they discipled us growing up. But I hope that, I don't know, we just remember to acknowledge God. And again, I love our sanctuary. I miss that we don't have a stained glass window sanctuary, because I do love a stained glass window sanctuary. And at the same time, like, I love going in a sanctuary and praying in a sanctuary, and those are great things and great practices, but it's not the only place I meet God. And I struggle to acknowledge where God is working too, right? Like, just because we are clergy does not mean we have figured this out.
Yeah. So that's, I'll share with you all a question that my spiritual director asks me, and I have learned to ask, but it really relates to this. And I invite you to try it. But here's the question. It's, what's God's invitation in this? What's God's invitation in this? And that is, that then puts you in a posture of being open to what God might do through this moment. And that has really changed my way of seeing things. What's God's invitation in this? And certainly for this particular time, right, in which we have multiple pandemics going on, obviously COVID and racism and this, racial justice, it's like, okay, what is God's invitation here for me and for our church? And are we willing to say yes to that? Are we open to it? But that's times in our lives when we forget to acknowledge God, even though God is working. It's when we are we are closed off and not open to the invitation that God has before us. Yeah.
Yeah. And that leads great into my next question that I want to talk about. We're full of good segues tonight.
There you go.
So the women of Bethlehem that again showed up in chapter 1 and they told Naomi, girl, you don't look so good. They kind of point out, I think, by coming in and them being the ones to name the child, I think what it creates, I love me a story with good bookends. Yeah. I've started rewatching the Harry Potter film series because they're on Peacock for free until the end of the month. And I don't think I had ever gone back and watched the first movie since the last one came out. And I forgot how many things are bookended when you know the ending, going back and watching the beginning, right? And vice versa. How many things from the beginning of the story play into the end. And that's just good writing, right? That's beautiful storytelling. We love that. And so this bookend that's happening here is conversation with the women, because when Naomi talks to the women at the beginning, she says she's empty. And the way in which I've come to kind of experience and describe grief this year is I think that grief is a cloud. And sometimes the cloud of grief is right here and it's blinding me. And sometimes it's away and it's behind, I can't see it, but it's kind of always there, right? And this is grief of pandemic. This is grief of personal loss. This is grief of moving, of physical distancing, of, coming to better be aware of the racial problems in our world, the grief of still experiencing sexism, and hearing of others who experience sexism or xenophobia. So grief is a cloud, right? And I think that for Naomi, the cloud of grief was blinding in chapter 1. And that's valid. That's a valid place for the cloud of grief to be. And sometimes the cloud of grief is not blinding and it's above or it's behind. And so I just want to maybe take a moment, what encouragement do we all, and again, this is all of us in the comments too, what encouragement do we have from Naomi's story? And I'm sure her late husband's not forgotten just because she has a grandson now. But she's no longer talking about how empty she is, right? So what encouragement maybe does that have for us, or do we have for particularly maybe in 2020 along the lines of it's not always going to be like this?
Yeah, I really appreciate that question and just reflection on grief. I think it's really important right now. I mean, that's we are in a time of collective grief, and I think we have to acknowledge that. So I just appreciate you bringing it up and inviting space for that. And I want to acknowledge too, Kathy's had a couple comments here. I want to just point out before we kind of move deeper into that. And she quotes one of my favorite scripture, and from the Message, I love Eugene Peterson's take on Romans 12. So here's what I want you to do, God helping you, take your everyday ordinary life, your sleeping, eating, going to work, and walking around life, and place it before God as an offering. Yes, Kathy, that's so good. And that really is like Wesley's prayer, right? As the covenant prayer, not my will, but your will, so that's really good. Thanks, Kathy, for sharing that. And so yeah, on this idea of grief, you said, it will not always be this way. It might, I don't know. Like, you know what I mean? We just don't know. Like, we don't know. We don't know what the future holds. We don't. And so that's really my point, is that we've got to just be present to what is present to this moment. And because I'll tell you, like, if I start like looking out into the future, I have what's known as like anticipated grief or anticipated anxiety. And
I have pre-anxiety to my anxiety. It's fine.
Okay, there you go. Like, and we ain't got time for that, like it's just like, I guess for me, when I think about grief, I think about being present to this moment, how I'm feeling. And part of that is naming the loss, like actually answering the question, like, what are you grieving? Because sometimes we think we're grieving one thing and actually it's something else, or it is that thing and it's another thing, so and especially right now we have multiple griefs going on. Yeah. And it's really important to name the grief and to really have like a narrative around it. What's the story I'm telling about this grief? But I think the last thing I'll say, and then I really want to give this time to you because I think you have such insight about this. But when I think of like ideas for how to stay present with how to grieve well, I really do think we've got to turn to the scriptures, like that there is great resource here for that. And for me, it's the Psalms that allow me the space to feel and allow me to share my open emotions with God. And so there's those laments in the Psalms that are really helpful, because when I don't have the words to say, I can usually find them in the Psalms. And then you can actually participate in like a Lectio Divina, which is a way to be present to the passage and like what's moving in this right now for me, and what's the prayer God wants me to pray from this that's leading me to express my feelings. So I just, I really think that's it. Naming our grief. What is the story I'm telling about it? And just being fully present to the feelings and being okay, knowing that it's, you have space to offer your authentic feelings to God, and God can handle it, and God's going to not leave you. God will be there. Like we see reflected in the love of these women, that they are there for each other, no matter what, they're there. And that's how we can be for each other, showing up. And like you said, not that you say anything, but that you're there. And people won't remember what you say anyway. They'll remember that you showed up. And that's really important to keep in mind now, especially. We can still show up for each other. Maybe, drive-bys or, drive-by visits or yard visits or, Zoom meetings or whatever. But it's like, how can we still say, okay, tell me about your grief right now. Like, I want to listen to you. I want to acknowledge it. And I want to sit with you in it, if that's what you need. So.
Yeah. So apparently it is book suggestion night on Bible study.
Awesome.
Because I have a couple of, and just because my relationship with grief started a little bit earlier than the pandemic this year. So I joke that I'm 3 months ahead of everyone else, which is not true, but I did get a little bit of a jump start on grieving, unfortunately. So one of the books that's been really helpful is sitting right next to me. So this is called The Body Keeps Score. And it's
I think you're actually muted there. I don't know what happened. I thought it was me, and then I realized it was you. So yeah, sorry, you might want to repeat that. It looks like a great book, though.
Okay, so I'm back. Hello, sorry. So it's called The Body Keeps Score, and it's a holistic take on trauma and what it does to our mind, body, and spirit, and how healing is in our mind, body, and spirit. So it's been a great book to read while trauma is happening, instead of, a lot of people have discovered this resource years and years and years later. So it's been a really great one to read now, almost while it's happening. It's very long. It's a longer take. There's also a workbook that's on Amazon that I think is actually on sale for Prime Day, that goes with it as well, that kind of helps you process what's going on if you're not a journaler and you don't have that in your regular practice. The other one for grief that I found is really great is it's literally called It's Okay That You're Not Okay. That has been a really great resource. And I actually, this sounds really silly, but I'm a millennial, so here we are. I follow the author on Instagram, and she posts quotes from the book. And so half the time scrolling through Instagram, I'll run into, what is it? Like one of her quotes. It's like, love doesn't stop, love just is, right? Like, and you're like, oh man, okay, keep scrolling through Instagram. So that's a great resource as well. The other thing, and it's plugging fall programming night, after Thanksgiving, Creekwood members and anybody who's interested, Carol Crilly and I are going to be actually leading a class on grief that we're going to do for 3 weeks, that we're hoping will be the best take that we can give in 3 weeks, just to kind of coach us through and give us some resources and tools to how we cope right now, particularly with the holidays coming up. So that'll be the first 3 Mondays after Thanksgiving. We'll have it in the sanctuary. It'll be distanced, obviously, but that's going to be coming down the pike as well. So this is just a great night for books and programming plugs. But yeah, I think
I love that you're doing that. I think that is so important. And again, like, can we as a faith community, this kind of circles back to where we started, which is authentic, vulnerable community. And, people that show up in those grief circles, that takes courage. and that matters. And so I'm really grateful that y'all are doing that. And I think that's where we really can experience grace in a way that we might not otherwise, so really appreciate that.
Yeah. And I'll just add the caveat, just as this for the class, there's no amount of loss that like qualifies you for the class. Like if the pandemic has been hard and it's causing you grief, come to the class. Like it is not that you have to have lost a spouse or a parent. Like there is no prerequisite for coming to this. So please feel free. Don't feel like it's not for you. We want that to be something that's for all of us. Even if, someone you love is grieving, it might be important to attend that. So I'm trying to read Kathy's comment while talking, which is not helping. So I'm just going to read it. So she said, it's encouraging that God loves and cares for us no matter what our position or condition or circumstances are. Even if conventional measures aren't available where we would see an answer, God can work through where we see and has a hope and a future for us. That's so true. And that's such an encouraging where I told you the Bradfords, they hop on and they're in the comments and I just love it. Absolutely, Kathy. And I think, and actually that's going to lead to my next question. I'm on fire tonight. So we're going to do 18 through 22 super fast, where we're going to watch Keri Lynn try to pronounce names, and it's going to be terrible. So it says, now are the descendants of Perez. Perez became the father of Hezron, Hezron of Ram, Ram of Amminadab, Amminadab of Nashon, Nashon of Salmon, Salmon of Boaz, Boaz of Obed, Obed of Jesse, Jesse of David. Okay, that's a really long-winded way to say, hey, these two, Ruth and Boaz, we ended up with Israel's favorite king at the end of the day.
Right.
Which I love a good genealogy moment. I think it's so beautiful, the ways in which Israelite culture tracked who they came from and how that mattered. And so I kind of have two questions as we wrap up, and I'll go ahead and combine them so we can discern how we want to talk about it. So the first is that in this section, we get to David, who is really one of the biggest characters in the Israelite story. The commentary said Israel's most loved king. And if David Lesnar were here, he'd be like, oh yeah, it is me, but I'll make the joke for him since he's not here. But a genealogy, sometimes we skip over reading these, right? Like in Matthew, we skip over reading that at the Christmas story. But it's such an ordinary thing that's communicating such an extraordinary message, right? And so what I'm seeing in this too is from the very beginning, Ruth, a Moabite, danger, danger, danger for Israelite people, ends up with Israel's favorite king at the end of the day as a descendant. And so just kind of twofold question, right? And maybe this is a great one for the comment section as well, is what are ordinary things that we are seeing God work extraordinary things through, like genealogies that maybe we're forgetting to acknowledge? Like, what are some that you're seeing even right now? But then the second, I want to talk about, it's just not said here, but Ruth's a Moabite. Like, Ruth was a total outsider through this whole story. And really, like, in this last chapter, like, Ruth isn't really talked about. Like, we don't get any quotes from her. It's Naomi who's holding the child at the end of the day. So even Ruth the Moabite is left out of the end of her. Like, this book should be called Naomi, not Ruth. Ruth is an instrument. And so, how Ruth is used in the story, but even not included in the telling of the story, what is that speaking to us about? And we'll just name it, those that we don't want to include in our faith communities, right? The people that if they walked in the sanctuary, we would say, danger, danger, danger.
Yeah. So, gosh, I think that on the whole genealogy question, it just is sort of a rule of thumb, but it's true because you just trace it back. But like, there's a lot of really kind of messed up people in the genealogy. You know what I mean? Like, these are not saintly people. They're just not. And certainly David is not. But I think it's really important to recognize that there's no like eligibility requirement for God to use people. That God, in fact, worked through people that had a lot of challenges and were not the most ethically or maybe morally pure, even. That's just worth stating. That God chooses the misfits sometimes, which is hopeful for me. I
Thank
think,
God.
and for all of us. And so that just, I think sometimes it's a story we tell ourselves of like, well, God won't use me because of what I did, or, I don't know. That's a narrative that needs to change for us, that God is wanting to use people who are open and willing as God's instruments in the world. And that's what we see, of course, in Ruth and Naomi throughout this story too. So I just wanted to kind of point that out, I think. And then, I want to hear from you, because I love how you brought out this last question about, and we kind of talked about this earlier, about the other, and the other that we have othered, in fact, is the Christ in our presence. So what do you think about that, Keri Lynn? What are some of your insights?
Yeah, it's so interesting. Growing up my whole life in the church was the place that I wanted to be. The church felt like home when home didn't feel like home. And so a lot of my work and a lot of my passion comes behind people who can't walk in our churches and feel the way that I felt my whole life. And that comes from a massive amount of privilege. And that's important to acknowledge. But a lot of the time, my question is, why does it take privilege to feel welcome in the church? Why can't it just be everyone that can, like, why can't we all just feel this way? And so I think and I think it's contextual, right? Like, I think for certain kinds of churches, somebody who looks like me walks in and everybody's like, oh, whoa, what's about to happen here? Or what? She lost? What's going on? But what I see in this story is, I really do think that if we had like a behind the scenes of what God was saying behind all of this, it doesn't matter that Ruth's a Moabite, even though the author calls her Ruth the Moabite every single time, like it's told again and again and again.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. Like, the work through Ruth still happens. Mm-hmm. Even though Ruth is left out of the end of her own story, or at least the book they named after her. I think I do think that and sometimes we're not aware of it either, of the people we don't want walking in our sanctuary, right? Like, we're okay with like the misfit that's like me, but what about the misfit that's different than me and is a misfit that makes me uncomfortable? Because it's a different kind of misfit, if that makes sense, without being super explicit. But I think there is a we and they, and we are always right and they are always wrong mentality, instead of, and to go back to what we said earlier, what if everybody who walked in our sanctuary or hopped online could hear when they log on or when they walk in, you are a blessing. And that was the first thing they heard when they walked in the church. How different would so many folks' stories be if that was the case? And I think what we see towards the Moabites here is what we sometimes implicitly do to people in our churches, right? Like, we don't even know we're doing it. But I've worked with a lot of folks who are really done with the church because of being treated like a Moabite.
Yeah. Well, you're you're bringing up a word for me. The word is mercy, and in Hebrew, it actually has two different meanings. It means blessing and unwarranted compassion.
Wow.
Yeah. And I've been reflecting on that. I wrote an article recently about this, about how, like, what would it be like if we showed mercy to one another? And that, even relating to like your neighbors who have in their yards signs of the politics that are opposite of yours, like, could we still cross the street and get to know them? And could we offer them blessing and unwarranted compassion? Like, could we do that? And in that way, again, that's us embodying the love of Christ for everybody, regardless of what kind of sign they have in their yard, you know. But I really think that's for me one of the invitations of our conversation tonight is this call to not just be a blessing, but to remind others that they're a blessing, you know, and in that way confer a blessing on them. That really is, there's such power in showing that kind of mercy to one another. That gosh, if we could do that, I think the world would be better.
Oh man, well, and even just like, yeah, I mean, constantly asking ourselves how we can be a blessing to other people is a really great way to go about mission. But then I think there is something to like looking someone in the eye and telling them that they are a blessing. I mean, how different would our mission trips look, and how different would, you know, the way in which we view, you know, even the simple and mundane things in the church, right? Like I guess the thing too, here it is. Telling someone that they are a blessing is a COVID-friendly way of greeting them in church.
True. Yes.
The handshakes and the hugs are gone.
Yes. I love the kind of acknowledgement that, you know, the Christ in me acknowledges the Christ in you, like recognizing that. But, you know, the other thing, and maybe this is a final idea maybe of to-do list things, is what would it be like? And this really comes from the neighboring movement. So this is something that I've been learning about and greatly admire and believe is the way towards deeper discipleship and transformation of our world. So, but what would it be like if you got to know the two neighbors, like the neighbors on each side of you, your house, if you're in a house or apartment? What would it be like to get to know the three neighbors in the houses in front of you, and then the three neighbors behind you? So there's like 8 neighbors, you know. What would it be like if I'm doing the math right? Yeah, 8, good. So yes, 3, 2, 3. And like, what if we all like got to know our neighbors and really invited that kind of compassionate relationship and opened up the way for blessing one another, regardless again of whatever political affiliations, that we could embody the Christ for one another and create communities that are more loving and filled with the loving kindness that we see reflected in the story of Ruth. And I think that's my hope for our world. If we could all do that, if people of faith would initiate that kind of communal, community, neighborhood-oriented kind of loving kindness, that'd be really good. Let's do that. Yeah.
Bill brought up a nephew of theirs that also, I mean, he says he wonders what would have happened if people had told him that he was a blessing. And Bill, just to your point of wondering if you did that enough, I mean, sometimes in folks' journeys, they just have their ways in moving. That I know that God is still working in your nephew's life, and I know that you are doing that enough. And Bill and Kathy, I know that you both are certainly a blessing to him and a blessing to us. So thank you all Bill, thank you for that comment and that transparency and that vulnerability for sharing. I know that that's not easy on the World Wide Web on Facebook, even though it seems like it is. It's really not, to be actually vulnerable on Facebook. But yeah, I think, Blair, you bring up a great point, particularly, you know, we talk about political affiliation, but I would extend that even further. Like, even if your neighbors do have a different denominational affiliation or even religion than you, again, like my favorite night of worship ever came from a Jewish person. And so don't be afraid of the reasons that are going to tell you why you can't go and be present with somebody, right? All of these dividing lines that are going to tell us that we can't are reasons to stop the building of this sacred community, I think, that we're talking about. And so I just want to kind of add that encouragement as we're closing out. So Blair, do you have anything else you want to add before we?
I just want to say thanks to Kathy for that blessing there that she's given us tonight, and for Bill for being on. Really appreciate just sharing with you all and hearing your comments. And I've learned a lot from this, and I thank you for inviting me into Ruth and into this conversation with you, because I feel the Spirit at work here. I really do, on me, and some of the takeaways I have about blessing and neighboring and vulnerability and grief. I mean, we have covered a lot, Sister Keri Lynn. So this is I've got a lot of notes, things to think about, and I really appreciate it. It's just really fun when you dig into scripture, what God will do. So thanks for the invitation to be with you tonight.
Absolutely. And to everybody who tuned in or is watching later, David Finley, hello.
Finley, yeah. I am a Finley fan. It's good to see you, David.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for tuning in. And those of you who are watching later, if you have any questions, don't forget, we're kind of always monitoring Creekwood's page. So if any questions come up, or if anything tonight, and maybe this is an important thing to say, if anything tonight was particularly meaningful or painful from what we talked about, please know that you can always call myself and David to talk these things through. We also have a licensed counselor who has partnered with Creekwood and has offered some free sessions to Creekwood members. So if that's something that you're finding yourself needing right now, please feel free to reach out. Our Facebook messages through Creekwood's page are always open. David and I both monitor those, as well as our prayer request form on our website. So just, if anything in here is particularly bringing some things up tonight, especially, just want to encourage you all that those spaces are open, and we're happy to listen and to be helpful as best we can through that. So that is all I have for us. To everybody, we'll be on Facebook Live on Sunday morning at 8:30 and 11, and we're talking about temptation and evil. So should be a great time. I'm preaching.
Oh, I love it. Okay, I will tune in. That sounds very good.
Yeah, but there's some great Jared Kilman singing in traditional service, everyone. So it's going to be a great Sunday. And then mark your calendars for Blessing of the Animals next week. The like most offbeat animal I have blessed so far is a tortoise, and I would love to beat that.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
We'll see.
So I'm hoping for some hedgehogs and some horses. But that'll be next Sunday night at 4:30. And any other questions or anything anybody has, our emails are always open for you all, as well as the messaging on Facebook. So thanks everybody for tuning in, and we are going to sign off. Everybody have a good night.